My name is Jacob Clevenger, and this is Extracurricular Activities and its correlation to sheet music. Going through this process, the first thing to know is where exactly do students and children in general get exposed to music? Looking at Diane Bell's study, she found that as young as 3 months old, students are able to pick out a structure and even recognize classical music that they've heard before. And she even states at the very beginning of this quote, classical music has a more complex musical structure. What exactly does this mean? Well, this can prove that the complexity of classical music primes and utilizes the brain of young babies to help solve spatial problems. Furthermore, once children reach around the age of 10, it's genuinely a great time to start learning music. You can get them exposed to instruments such as recorder, trumpet, clarinet, whatever they so choose, but this sets the foundation, it sets their aptitude for music. Fred Spano, the coordinator of music education at UNC at North Carolina, he stated that after a certain point, it's not that you can't learn music, but it's that you can't change the aptitude for it. And this is kind of the foundation of my research. I wanted to show that at any age, you're able to go through and you're able to change, and anybody can learn music at any point in their life as long as they're willing to put in the effort for it. Furthermore, this led to my research question of how does one's involvement in extracurricular activities correlate to their ability to learn sheet music within Middle Tennessee? I'm going to go through and I'm going to explore all the different regions and all the different categories of students within high school and see how they're able to comprehend music. To do this, I need to appeal to the students. Every child has different learning abilities, and they learn in different ways, such as hearing and seeing. Some learn better by reading, and others learn better by asking questions. So I needed to appeal to the student. And I found that in a study done by Lopez, Niguez, and Pozo, they found that students from constructive teachers have a more complex and deep understanding of music. So this means that Constructivism is the best style of teaching. But what exactly is Constructivism? The University of Buffalo states that Constructivism is the theory that learners construct knowledge rather than just passively take in information. This means that when I'm going through and teaching my students music, that I want them to truly understand what they're learning and ask questions and be constantly engaged. This allows me to have analytical results for my participants, and this is the most effective way that I need to implement this within my research. My prediction is that people that are involved in physical activity will perform at a higher and faster rate than others who are not involved. Why is this? It's because on the field and any type of physical activity, there's normally music in the background. By listening and hearing, they're able to go through and comprehend beats and sounds of music. This auditory information plays a performance-determining role, and through all their different senses, like hearing, seeing, and even physical touch, they relate to musicians. Like musicians, they have multisensory areas. And as stated by Emily Zimmerman and Amir Lahav, multisensory areas enable musicians to integrate complex sensory inputs and the resultant motor outputs necessary to play music. My reasoning behind this is that I want students to understand that learning music really isn't that difficult. I want them to aspire to be musicians, and that anybody can learn music at any age. It's their will to learn. Some definitions you might need to know going into this is sheet music is just printed music. It's a physical hard copy. You're looking and you're reading notes. You might want to know that the treble clef is just a clef on the staff, and those notes are arranged from G to C. It's around 8 notes. It's very limited number of notes that they're learning. And then you have extracurricular activities. Extracurricular activities is anything done before or after school. My method going into this is going to be an experimental method. This is going to include quantitative data, and throughout my research, I will collect these numbers and analyze them. Now let's get into the steps. Step 1 is I need to find participants. I went to 5 different study halls. I went through and I talked to different students, and I had a total of 54 students I talked to. Well, out of these 54, one of them accidentally gave them a wrong test, which is included in my limits, and 6 of them already know music, which left me with a total of 47 participants, which is plenty. And then to those 47 participants, I gave them each a survey. I asked them simple questions of, do you know how to read sheet music? Are you in any type of sport? Are you in any type of extracurricular activities? I wanted to get to know the student and really be able to understand who they are so I can categorize them. Then I gave them worksheets. In these worksheets, they included simple acronyms like Every Good Boy Deserves Fudge and FACE, so they're able to understand the simple concept of music and how to read it. These worksheets are given to normally 6th graders, but I wanted to implement these simple ideas so that the high schoolers can learn at a very, very fast rate. Then the 4th step was I gave them a review day where I went on one-on-one and I talked to each student, and then I gave them a test. And this test was scored out of 25 questions, and so in some of my mean, median, mode data, you'll see that it's out of 25. Oh, it's also very important to note that this study was done over a course of 3 weeks. When analyzing mean, median, mode, it's important to know what each of these mean. Mean is basically, you add up all the numbers and you divide it by the count of the numbers. It's your average. The medians, you order your numbers from least to greatest and you take your middle number. This is important because it gives more accurate information than your mean whenever you have a lot of outliers. Then your mode is the most reoccurring number in the field. Now let's get into the actual data. What did I find? I had physical activity and people who were not physically active in my first set. I found that when people were physically active, they had a mean and a percentage of 77.7%. And people who were not physically active scored an average of 89.5%. What does this mean? It means that people who were not physically active scored 11.82% higher than people who were physically active. Then let's go to the second set. I had 5 different types of students. I had people who were athletes, or any type of sports. This is represented in blue. I had people who were in academic clubs, such as Beta Club and National Honor Society, represented in red. I had people who did nothing with their free time, which is represented in yellow. And then other categories, such as rodeo and bowling and horse riding, they're represented in green. And dual-purpose athletes, those who are in sports and in academic clubs, such as Beta Club, represented in orange. I found that athletes scored an average of 67%, academic clubs had 84%, nothing had 88%, others had 95%, and dual-purpose athletes had 82%. And from this, it might be a lot to take in at first, but you want to notice that athletes were 27% lower than the other category. And this is important to draw attention to because they are scoring phenomenally lower than everybody else. Not only is it athletes, but it's people who are physically active in general. So I wanted to see whether this was just mean or is there more that we can go with this. So I took the mean, median, and mode of the results. I found that whenever you're looking at athletes, not only do they score low on their mean, but their median was also fairly low considerate to others. Their median was 22 out of 25. And this shows that they're around 2 to 3 points lower out of 25 compared to all of the other activities. However, when you're looking at physical activity, it's shown that their median is 24.5. This is beneficial because it shows that within the physical activity sector, that there were a lot of outliers that brought the mean down to a certain point. Some limitations going into this is simple will to learn. Not a lot of students were actually able to put in the extra time and effort to get into this. I had some accessibility problems to my classes, and I gave someone the wrong test, and so he wasn't able to participate. And then this is something that I thought was very, very interesting. I was going through and I was teaching, and on test day, there was these 3 kids in this class, and they reversed their acronyms. So instead of going starting from E at the bottom and going up, they started E at the top and went down. It's not necessarily that they didn't understand the information, but they were just confused. And then there was also abstinence. There were some people that were absent from your classes or even on test day that probably skewed my numbers just by hair, maybe 3 or 4%. To conclude, people who are physically active seem to score significantly lower. There's a gap between athletes and everybody else. I also found that multisensory brains, I might have had the wrong perspective on it. Maybe it's not you need a multisensory brain to learn sheet music, but you need a multisensory brain to actually play and comprehend and be able to connect with other musicians while you're playing. Overall, I did find that athletes are less susceptible to learning music at a faster rate than others, and they might need more time to just genuinely grasp the concept. Also found that advanced learning occurs everywhere in high school. It doesn't matter at what stage you are, you're able to learn at a very high and fast pace compared to everybody else. Within this very, very short 3 weeks, every single one of my high schoolers, for the most part, was able to pick up this music and be able to almost master it by the end. As seen by the mode earlier, the mode was an average of 25, meaning that out of all those classes, most of our students scored a 25, which is a perfect score, which is phenomenal. It's really, really amazing. I also disproved Fred Spano's theory about student development in music. It's not that you can't change the aptitude, because you can. I found that it doesn't matter who you are, you can do whatever you want, and you can change and be who you want to be. And I just think overall, I'm really, really proud of my students, and I'm really excited to see where they went, and hopefully they become musicians out of this. In the future, I would like to see an in-depth analysis of the students' lives, and I want to answer the question of why. I would like to see someone go in and examine suburban areas, rural areas, and even urban areas, and see what's going through their brains, what's their daily life like, and why are some areas able to learn faster and more acceptable than others. I think it'd be really inspirational to see this study happen and even get into this. And then lastly, I would like to see a male versus female learning capability. This is because Eric Wahern stated that males tend to be more achievement-oriented, whereas females are societal and performance-oriented. She is a professor at the University of Alabama, and I think that taking her word and going through and truly examining what she says can be really beneficial, and it'd be really interesting to see the results. Thank you. Right, questions?
Hi, Jacob.
Hi.
How did your review of the methods used by scholars in the field inform your selection of a research method that is aligned with your research question?
Okay. So there was a source called Advanced Learning for Young Musicians and Educated Scholars by Briscoe D. And basically what he did was he went through and I wanted to relate my study to people at an elementary school age. And so he went through and he discovered how elementary school kids were able to learn music. And so he went through and he gave these studies to these different kids, and he showed them different ways, like a direct method of teaching and like an inversely proportional way of teaching. And so through these different ways, I kind of picked off of it, and even found that in the Lopez and Iniguez and Pozo study, they found that Constructivism is the best form of teaching. And so I kind of used those methods and wanted to help my students truly grasp and explore music. And I think the best way I did this, and I found that in each study, they let their students ask questions. And so if you're able to get your students engaged, in which I did, I believe, then you're able to have a successful study. Was there any other part to that question that I missed?
How did your review of the methods used by scholars in the field inform your selection of a research method that's aligned with your research question?
Okay, yeah, and then from there, I wanted to, of course, study multiple areas within high school. So not only did I use their idea of constructivism and letting your students learn it their own way, but I wanted to explore all areas. And so I kind of took their aspect and added my own little tweak to it to get my correlation between extracurricular activities and learning sheet music.
All right, Jacob. How does your new understanding address a gap in the scholarly conversation?
I believe that finding that athletes, this is the most exciting part. Athletes are performing so significantly lower. It's a whole 24%, and we're going through and we're seeing that it's not just athletes, but even like physical activity. And this gap that I found was that there is something missing, and my conception of it was all wrong. Completely, and I think that's the cool part, is you have to go in this completely open-minded. And so I think that understanding that athletes aren't where they're supposed to be, and their intuitiveness and their desire to want to learn is not there compared to other types of students. And so I think that if we're able to recognize this as a whole in the community, then we can go through and address the problem and the gap that is presented there.
Jacob, if you could revisit your research process, what would you do differently and why?
So going through my process, I think I'd want to have, on the fourth day, so this was over a span of 3 weeks, I had the first 3 days were worksheet days. The fourth day was a review day. I think I would wanted to add, in between the worksheet number 1 and worksheet number 2, I think I would change my method to add another day where I had another one-on-one session with my students. I think going in and if I was able to change that and maybe even add an extra week into where they're able to process information, we probably could have seen perfect scores across the board. And the limitations wouldn't be there. And if I was able to really get my students to understand through an extra review day or an extra worksheet or two, what exactly music is and understand the concept of how it works, we wouldn't have those outliers that are presented in their information.
All right, yeah. Jacob, thank you so much. All right, and we'll open the floor now for any general questions. So, and remember, this portion is not scored in any way.
I have just a quick, did you, because I agree with you, you said that one of the things that you would like to track maybe in the future would be the male versus female progress or achievement or whatever. Did you keep up with that at all? Or
I did,
yeah.
And that's kind of what kind of derived that question. I found that females did learn at a higher rate, but I didn't include it in my presentation. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
But yeah, I didn't include it in my presentation because it didn't really relate to what I was giving. But I was curious, so that's one of the questions I did include on my survey and stuff.
I didn't know if you would track
So
that at all or not, but.
yeah, they learn like 4 or 5% better than males, which is actually really interesting. So yeah.
So with your subsets of individuals, those that are athletes only, those who are like athletes and other academic things.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have about similar numbers in each of those, or was there more in kind of one category like that did nothing with their time than others?
We can go back. So you're saying that like, I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Just like the sheer number of kids in each of those categories, are they relatively similar, or
Okay.
do you have more in one category?
So the academic club they all averaged around 10 to 14 in each category, but the academic club was like, I had absolutely nobody who just did a club only. And so my limit was around, I think it was like 3 or 5 students. And so it kind of set me back on that number. And I don't know necessarily how we're going to get that number up because our school obviously is so involved. And so that's really the only one. Everybody else is around 10 to 14, but the academic club is the only really limit that set it back. But they still were right there with everybody else if you took the mean, median, and mode.
Jacob, your research was mainly focused on Fairview High School, right? Do you think that, you know, if you looked at a larger school or varying demographics, would you predict that your research outcome would have been any different?
I think it would have been a lot more dramatic. I think when you're going in, if I were to go into a metro school per se, I think maybe our athletes would probably be at 50%, sadly, but our academic club, I mean, they're still super involved, I believe, and I think the numbers would stay around the same with maybe a 5% error, and then our athletes would I think they would fall dramatically, just considering their aptitude to learn. They don't want to be there and want to learn. But if you went into, I think even if you went into like a super urban area, that your athletes, I don't think they want to do anything else besides go to football practice or go do soccer or whatever they choose to do with their sports. But yeah, I think there's just something missing there, and yeah.
Jacob, do you think the culture of the community, for example, the socioeconomics of the community, play a factor in your athletes' performing?
Of course. I mean, kind of like the example of the rural areas. I know a lot of students, and I've even talked to a couple teachers who taught in very poor areas, and they said that a lot of the athletes, that is their way out, is through being athlete only. Like they don't have the smarts or the intelligence, and a lot of people are even scoring like 800s on their SATs, and they can't go anywhere. And I think that like even the idea that just being athletic is not going to get you anywhere. You have to genuinely have the aptitude and the want and the will to change yourself, to change your studying habits, and to actually apply yourself in school. And so I think if you go and you look at these different areas, it's just going to be the same result.
Yes, anybody else questions? All right, so we have about a 10-minute break. And so we'll have some fruit, go have a granola bar, sit, chill, talk, get up, whatever you want to do. And then Bianca, you'll start at 8:40.